Hi, my name is Kirk Morales with Winning Variant. Today we're going to walk through the installation of the Winning Variant split testing native app from the Snowflake marketplace. We'll configure the app. We'll talk about the different types of experimentation assets that we can create for different split test use cases you might have within your organization. We'll go through what that implementation actually looks like, and then at the end, we'll touch on how an analyst can use the raw experimentation data to analyze the result of split tests, taking the nuances of their organization into account. The first thing we're going to do is find the native split testing app from Winning Variant on the Snowflake Marketplace. It's currently a private listing, so you'll want to go ahead and click Request. At that point, our team can make it available to you. Once it is, it'll show up under your apps, and you'll be able to install it. I've already gone ahead and installed the app here, so we can see it kind of showing up here. And then if we were to click on the app, we would grant permissions and finalize the installation process. Once Winning Variant is ready to go, it'll take you to this page, which is the built-in Streamlit app for administering Winning Variant. This isn't the primary UI. This is really just for admins to be able to see the status of all the different services and ultimately get the URL to use for the configuration UI. So installation and configuration is very simple, very straightforward. Once the app is ready, we can log into the configuration UI, and we can see all the different assets and manage the experimentation assets that are available to us. We'll revisit this in a minute. In order to demonstrate how this all works, once the app is installed and ready to go, we're going to walk through an example of split testing a machine learning model. This example assumes that we have some sort of model that helps predict churn for an imaginary SaaS application. So we are using the model to predict if a user is likely to churn based off of behavior, and then we're perhaps offering them some sort of promotion or consultation to try to reduce churn. So what we want to test with this is that our V2 of the model is not just more valid in producing more accurate results, but we want to make sure it's actually reducing churn. So we're going to compare this against our actual business metric, which is also in Snowflake. The first thing we would create is what we call a lab, which is effectively a workspace. So we went ahead and created what we just called a samples lab. We also created a subject type. This is simply the type of identifier that might enter an experiment. This is the identifier that we randomize off of. In this example, we're doing it for unique users or known users in the system. So we have a customer ID subject type. And then we can go ahead and create our experiment. Everything, as you can see, all assets inside of Winning Variant are defined using YAML. So we're simply just applying a resource by providing a YAML file. In this case, we're creating an experiment that we're calling ML churn. We can set name, description. We can put it inside of that samples lab that we created above. We specify the subject type. We can give it a hypothesis. And then we specify the variant. So in this case, it's a simple A/B test. We're comparing our control, which is the existing V1 of our model, to a treatment, which is the new V2 of the model that we want to test. Then when we launch this, we're going to launch it with just a single cohort, launching it at 50/50. In practice, this would probably be more of a ramp up. So we could have cohort one, say, be 95% for control and 5% for treatment, just to make sure that there's no damaging effects. And then we could iterate on this and launch a cohort two in the future that's maybe more 50/50. In this case, just for simplicity, we're doing 50/50 between V1 and V2. Winning Variant will report an output of what was done with every action. So in this case, we can see the experiment was created. We can see the new ID. We can also see a resource version. So internally, the app versions every time a resource is created or updated. This allows for easy rollbacks later. So we don't have to worry about knowing exactly what changed to undo that change later. We can simply just roll back to a specific resource version if we need to. Switching back to the configuration UI, we can see we have a number of experiments in here. This churn model V2 is the one that we just created. We can also, if we wanted to look at some more of the administrative aspects of this, we could look at the labs that are available. So we have our samples lab, and we have two subject types here. We have an anonymous ID, and we have the customer ID, which is the one we just created for this experiment. And then if I go into the experiment, I can see everything that we just configured for it. So the subject type, the hypothesis, and then we can see information on our active cohort. If we were to have multiple cohorts, we'd be able to see the historical view of when each cohort went live, what each split was, what the variants were in different cohorts, because future cohorts might actually have newer variants that we haven't introduced yet, et cetera, et cetera. So going back to our notebook, now that all of these assets exist inside of the native app, we can immediately take a look at our dimension tables that are made available. So one is an experiments table, which lists out all of our active experiments. Here we have it filtered just by the one that we created. We can also look at all the variants for an experiment. So here we can see for this new experiment, we have control and treatment with a name and description for each. And we can look at variants per cohort. So here we're listing all of the cohorts for this new experiment. We can see the cohort index, the variant that is the different variants that are in each cohort, and what the split was and when those cohorts were created. So we'll use all of this in a later step when we're actually analyzing our experiments. So the next step here is actually implementing the experiment, right? So we have all the assets created, the experiment's ready to go. How do we use this? So in our example, as I mentioned, we're testing two different versions of a model, version 1 versus version 2. And so we created a very basic sort of pseudocode version of how we might actually run this model, assuming we're using the Snowflake model registry. So we're getting our churn predictor from the registry. We're calling the winning variant user-defined function in this case to say, for this particular customer ID, which would be stored in this variable, what's the assignment for that customer inside of this experiment? And what that means is winning variant's going to tell this script either show it version 1 or version 2. And more importantly, anytime that this is called during the lifespan of the experiment, the same result will be returned every single time. So that customer will be pinned to a particular variant inside of this experiment, which is really important to make sure that we don't have contaminated data later in our analysis. So we're going to call the UDF, winning variant is going to return either control or treatment, and then we're going to conditionally either run version 1 of the model or we're going to run version 2 of the model. Later, then, we'll be able to report on which customer was in which variant for the life cycle of the experiment, and then we can actually see how those different groups performed when it comes to churn reduction. We then have some sample assignments. So we're going to assume that this was run over the series of days or weeks or months or whatever was needed for the experiment, and we can see here some sample raw output. Every assignment has a unique ID. We have the subject ID, which in this case is actually our unique customer ID. We can see the variant that each one was put into for the experiment and what cohort they entered at and when they actually entered the experiment. The next step of this is then running all of the analysis. We have longer videos elsewhere. You can visit docs.winninvariant.com for full examples on how we actually run the analysis for an experiment like this. But this is just showing how simple it is to get an experiment up and running once the app is installed. One thing I'd like to revisit is when we're looking at actually creating and using assignments in an experiment, we gave an example using our user-defined function, but the same functionality is available through a RESTful API. So on docs.winninvariant.com, we outline what that RESTful API looks like. So you can implement this client side, let's say in some client side web app inside of a mobile app or any other server side code that you have, where you effectively pass the subject ID and the experiment that you want assignments for, and Winning Variant will return back what that particular user should see in that experiment. Thanks for taking the time to watch the video today. Again, my name is Kirk with Winning Variant. And if you have any other questions or want to see other implementation examples, please visit docs.winninvariant.com. Thank you.